South Campus. How you guys doing? Great to be here with you this morning. And you know, as we're wrapping up this Imagine Heaven series, I get to interview somebody at South Campus that I wrote about in Imagine Heaven, our very own Karen Marshall from South Campus. Give her a hand. And I've told you all along that people are really hesitant, even though 1 out of 25 people have had a near-death experience, people are really hesitant to talk about it. So I had to really twist Karen's arm to do this today. And but I'm so grateful that she is willing to talk about it. So Karen, kind of take us back to what happened that that led you to having this near-death experience.
Well, in 2009, I got H1N1. Most people know it as the swine flu.
Swine flu, yeah.
Not only did I get this nasty flu, but I also got a bacteria infection from the flu. And this bacteria infection has this long word, bacteremic pneumococcal pneumonia.
Say that twice.
Yeah, and especially when your mouth is dry.
Yeah.
And it was like a blood bacteria and infection. It's the type that surrounds your lungs, and the infection just goes out throughout your body and your organs. So I had a double whammy.
And I mean, I remember seeing the pictures, like they even put you in this, like, it was like a cocoon thing, right?
They put me in a special bed called a rotoprone bed, and yes, it cocoons a patient. It pads them all over. I mean, you can hardly even tell that a person's in this bed, and it rotates them up and down, and that's to help alleviate the fluids on the lungs that are pretty much compressed by the heart.
Wow.
So I really felt like I was fortunate to get this bed. It wasn't, at that time, it wasn't wide known throughout the medical field. My doctor, who's just a wonderful doctor, and I believe that God sent him to me. He tried all kinds of, medical treatments that they typically or traditionally use for this type of illness, but nothing really was working. So he remembered reading about this special bed, and he had heard that it had really good results. So he talked to my husband and asked if he could go ahead and get that bed, and the maker went ahead and agreed to ship it to Austin, like ASAP. And there was one problem with that, though. Since it was new to the Austin area, none of the nurses knew how to work it.
Yeah.
No. And so the doctor explained that to the maker, and they even sent a company representative with the bed to help train the nurses, so the nurses didn't, learn as they went, because if that was the case, it was probably going to be too late for me.
Well, and despite all that, it did get critical, didn't it?
It was very critical. My lungs were collapsed. My organs failed. I had my blood pressure that was just extremely low. And I had a fever that they couldn't get down less than 104. And the bacteria and the lack of oxygen went down to my feet. My toes and the bottom of my feet were like gangrene, and the tissue was dying. So yes, with all those efforts, I still was in very bad shape. And the doctor talked to my husband and said, we need to expect the worst, because it was really just minute by minute whether I was going to survive or not. Excuse me. And I had my two older children that were out of the state, and the doctor had told my husband, you need to get your children here as soon as you can, just to see their mother. And I think that was pretty much saying, you know, they need to come and say their last goodbyes. Well, my husband was very upset, and he didn't want to accept that I could go any minute, and he couldn't make that phone call to our 2 older children. And we have a pastor that's a friend of the family. It's my mother's pastor. He called our older children and told them that you know, they needed to get there as soon as they could. And my youngest son, he was too small, and he couldn't come to the hospital at all during this time period. So during this time, the pastor was organizing a hands-on healing with my family. And typically they only let one person or 2 people in ICU, but they allowed my whole family to come. Number one, what was going to be the harm of letting them come? They can't give me any germs.
You're in a coma. You're in a coma, and they think you're dying.
Right. So they organized a hands-on healing, and I have a pretty big family, and I also have 8 aunts on my mother's side, so they pretty much filled the room. And the pastor anointed me with oil, and he prayed and read James 5:14. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And I had people that were praying for me all over the country, actually outside of the country too. And you talk about the power in prayer. It was the very next day that my body started to heal, and my lungs started working. I was on a breathing machine, so they were able to wean the oxygen off a little bit. My organs started working. My fever broke. My blood pressure went up. And
your doctor said he called you a miracle girl, right?
He called me a miracle girl, yes. And I had just a lot of doctors that would come in my room, and they would say, you know, if this doctor comes in, I don't know who he is, and I'm like looking at him, what are you doing? What are you doing here? And
well, and it was during that time, like right before their prayer, that you think you had this near-death experience. And what was that like?
Yes, I think, or I believe, that it was during the time that my body was shutting down, and the hands-on healing, that I did have my near-death experience. And what I remember is that I was in darkness. It was very dark, but I wasn't afraid. And I'm always afraid of the dark. I wasn't afraid of the dark. It was extremely peaceful, and I just felt so loved. I knew I was out of my body. I knew that it was my spirit. I knew that my spirit was before God. You just couldn't help know that you were before God, because
like you just knew in your soul.
The peace and the love that you feel there is nothing like we can reach here. And I asked God a few times, what do I do? What do I do? Meaning, do I stay or do I go? And it wasn't like it was a verbal communication, because I didn't have the body. But it was mental thoughts, and that in
But real-
itself is
but
kind
real
of strange,
communication.
but absolutely, absolutely. And it seemed like a little while before God answered my prayer. I don't know, you know, because I don't know the concept of time there, but I didn't mind. I didn't mind if he didn't answer me right away, because I just loved where I was at. I wanted to stay, really. And it was kind of at that time that my grandmother appeared with others.
She had passed away?
My grandmother had passed away a few years before that, and I was very close to her. And she came, and others that were, some of them were tall. I remember 3 distinctively that were tall, and others that were shorter. And I believe that those were my relatives and my loved ones. And I did have 3 relatives that were extremely tall. I mean, they were like 6'3", 6'5". So I'm assuming that it was them, yes. And my grandmother reached out her arm and her hand to me. And, sorry. And I knew that, at that moment, I knew that what the answer was to my question. And I told my grandmother, it's not my time. That's what I was told. It's not my time.
And you found yourself back in your body?
Well, when I said that, they, my grandmother and the others, they just burst into this very bright light that it seemed to just flutter with happiness, joy, love, and fun. They just seemed to be having just a great time where they were. And I think that's when I started to heal.
Wow. And I mean, so you find yourself back in your body, but there was a lot of good that came from it, but it was difficult too, wasn't it, coming back?
It was very difficult. I had lost, just physically, for one, I had lost 50% of my muscle mass. So it was a struggle to really learn how to walk well. And I couldn't pronunciate my words, so I had to go through speech therapy. And actually, I have still a little problem with that. So if I make a little, then that's why. And I had to go through occupational therapy, psychological therapy, just all kinds of various therapies, because I don't think a person can go through something like that and just want to jump up and start telling about it.
Yeah.
Because it was a struggle.
Well, you had been on the brink of death, literally, and
Yes,
come back.
yes, and then I became depressed.
Why is that?
I became depressed because I wanted to be there. I didn't want to be here. There was just too much pain and too much struggles. And my husband took it as I didn't want to be here with him or our family, and it wasn't like that at all. I just wanted to be there because it was so wonderful.
Is
And
it kind of like you realize this is where we belong?
Yes.
This is temporary.
it is temporary. And I also realized that you have 2 different aspects. You have your body and you have your spirit, your soul. And when I was growing up, or up until that point, I always knew that, okay, your body stays in the ground and your spirit goes to heaven. And I never really understood that. I really didn't know what my spirit was. It was, because you feel like it's just all connected. But it's your thoughts, it's your feelings.
Like who you are,
it's
right?
who you are. That is your spirit. And
so you felt fully alive and fully yourself on the other side?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Well, my depression turned to anger, and I was very angry with my husband, my family, the doctor, God, and everybody who prayed for me, because I was like, why did y'all pray for me and bring me back to this? And so I was angry for a little while, actually for quite a while. And when I came out of my coma, I knew that I was supposed to tell my message. But having gone to see a JoJo, after going through all of that, I just couldn't tell my message. It's just really hard.
That's what everybody says. It's so difficult.
Well, for one, it's difficult to explain those feelings because you can't even imagine that
and
here.
It's something really of another dimension, right? It's like trying to explain a two-dimensional, flat, black and white land what a three-dimensional, colorful world is.
Yes, and we just can't reach that here. So I am here to tell you the message, and I'm here to tell you that God is love. He loves us. Heaven is real. He wants us to have a relationship with him. And I urge you that if you don't have a relationship with God, to seek that relationship with him. And if you already have a relationship with God, seek a deeper relationship with him, because that's what's important. When you stand before God, you know that nothing on the earth is important. Not your job, not keeping up with the Joneses or materialistic things. It's not to say we don't like those things.
Right.
I still like those things, but it's don't put all of those things above God.
Well, I know it was a huge step of faith for you to get up here and be faithful to that message. Let's give Karen a big hand. Well, and that's what we're talking about today. In these experiences, many people have different depths of this experience, but what I've been trying to show, and what I especially try to show in Imagine Heaven, is that it lines up with what we should expect from Scripture.